Welcome to this podcast, Mission GJ. At this time, we have Apostle Erickson Salazar and Pastor Jorge Batista. How good we are here, flowing in the prophetic for the house. That's right. Pastor Jorge, how you doing? Very well. How's everything there? We are happy to have you with us to also enjoy your experiences. And in that same way, we'd like to know a little bit more about your vast experience here in Generation Joshua in respect to the different missions you have taken on with Apostle and everything that has to do with the ministry and the kingdom. Tell us, Pastor Jorge. Well, Luis, for me, it's a little difficult. Pick a mission, a specific mission, because it's been many. And above all, I would like to go towards the teaching. Because after Apostle finished forming all of us, the initial team, with all those prophetic archives that today we nourish ourselves with again, one of the things that came afterwards is that Apostle sent me to give the studies once again from zero. And that wasn't just once. That happened more than 5 times. And that says a lot about why we have a ministry today, which is a teaching ministry, and why that is the principal thing here. Wow. Apostle said, this is tough. And Pastor Jorge says, this has been deep for me. I believe I didn't say it right. Probably it was more than 5. It was more than 5 times. And Apostle says, and in order to bring things into context, what he was trying to say is that first, we had the foundation, the initial foundation, as he says, in terms of the beginning of the ministry with the 30 studies, which is, there are more than 30 studies, as we said before. But we sent Pastor Jorge to edit all the teachings because people would write everything down. And from their notes is that we extracted and edited everything to turn it into more so like frameworks and the classes. It was a flow in the moment, and everybody's notes were gathered and turned into more developed studies, more formalized. So then when the structuring of the School of Ministry came, I was the first one to teach a School of Ministry. And once that was established, we had finished the evangelism classes, and then we did the framework of the School of Ministry, the School of Teachers. And then I handed everything over to Pastor Jorge, and I said, now you establish a School of Teaching. And he, after we gave the School of Ministry to everyone, we went back to zero, the whole ministry. Every time we would see that there was an area where people weren't understanding, everybody would go back to the beginning. And that's where Pastor Jorge said, more than 5 times people went back to zero. And that tells you that many people here were sent back to take the studies again more than 5 or 6 times. And you might say, but how? Wow. Yeah, what happens is, this is for everybody to know that this ministry was tested in a lab. This is not, we're going to see if this works. Let's see if we get results. No. This was tested through fire, Lewis says. Apostle says, everybody here has over 8 years of formation, from the basics to the structural through the ministerial. More than 8 years. More than 8 years of teachings. And no matter what, the teachings have never ended, because the archives that you're listening to now, that was the initial part of the School of Ministry. Everything you're hearing now was the fundamental part on which the ministry was started. And with that, Pastor Jorge structured the School of Ministry, and we worked the framework. We have the framework of the ministry in terms of formation, and we also have other ones that we haven't taken them out yet, which is like the theological school. What happens is that at the end, what we did is all the teachings of the ministry are within a theological framework, but it's a theology fundamented in the legal rights, handling legal principles. It's focused on that. We don't use the terminology theology, and we don't work with history as such, but we based ourselves in terms of what you handle on your day-to-day. We have a very basic theology that it's easy to handle, and within our day-to-day context and even cultural context. See how interesting? Something that you see how to handle yourself within your demand, spiritual demand, even psychological demand, material demand, social demand, that sort of theology. It is implicit in the teachings of the house. And since we didn't want the ministry to fall into intellectuality, because religion sometimes falls between, them being like intellectuals or lawyers or mystic people. So no. Our formation is for people that are common with their feet on the ground. That is the teaching. That's who the teaching is for. And I explain again, it's the teachings of the ministry are implicit in a very basic theology within the legal principles, which is our foundation. And you see the strength of this structure, because normally people get 2 cents of knowledge and then they start feeling very intellectual. Apostle says that's why we stop a lot of people, because there are teachings that are theological, and like Pastor Jorge designed the whole program and the topics within the theological, because we wanted to keep going deeper. But we noticed that there was a spirit of intellectuality, and we said stop. And we kept the handling of the spiritual world, the social world, how to handle yourself between the spiritual and the social, how to fuse what is not seen with what is seen. So that is the real part of what is a child of God. And Pastor Jorge says, excuse me, Apostle, some people in the back end were poking me like, okay, when are we going to talk about theology? When are we going to go deep into studying that sort of teaching? And I would tell them, well, for now, that's not what we need to do. Because, like Apostle was saying, what we wanted to transmit within the direction of the Spirit was a practical theology, not intellectual theology that would only feed the soul or the knowledge, but not the spirit. It wouldn't nourish the spirit in reality. Apostle says, yes, we took care of that. We were careful with that, because imagine, we wanted a leader with vocation of service, a member that was formed to be exposed to the Great Commission of salvation, not a person that would come to contend or to come to impress because they know they had a lot of depth. Where if they were going to engage in that back and forth, which is very normal in religion, where everybody will be in argument and interpretation, where everybody is in their own, research, and everybody, do you understand, is immersed in knowledge, and you wanted to see who knew more. So we took the ministry out of that, let's call it, that format, that way, that style. So we went to the necessary, which is what the life manual and Christ came for. To be prepared for the Great Commission of salvation. So you had a good thermometer to not get to that other point. Apostle says, well, the thing is that Pastor Jorge and myself, I've been in the ministry or in Christianity since I was young, and Pastor Jorge too. So we know what religion is, and we know how it operates and how it thinks, and we know its method. That is why we were avoiding. I always said, somebody would say, who taught you all that? And I would say, I learned how not to do it. I learned how not to do it. Coming from religion, you knew the things that didn't have to do with foundation. Because we have a lot of dogmas in religion, not just in religion as such, but even society. Because even society is religious. Of course, imagine if you are not in such social status, then that's religion. So you have codes. Oh, those that play for this team or that other team are better. So society operates with its own religion. It handles itself with, intellectuals, historians. Those are religion. Each philosophy, that's why from a sociological aspect, we know very well that idiosyncrasy, that religious idiosyncrasy, the social, but also the denominational one. So what we did is we detached ourselves from those stereotypes, and we went to the reference frame, the biblical reference of the server that goes and gives themselves for others. That's why you hear often two terminologies. One, today we are here for you. Tomorrow you unite with us, and then we go for others. And then the other one is to focus on our little, because that is where our wealth is. Those are principles that you don't hear anywhere else. You understand? Not because there's exclusivity in us. They're biblical. And it's not that many don't use them, but maybe with other terminologies. I'm just telling you that those are the fundamental basis of what the Great Commission of Salvation is. And in Pastor Jorge's case, we said, Pastor Jorge, let's work on this. You work this material. And it was hard work. And like I told you, our ministry has always been our lab, where we will give you a teaching, but I needed to see the fruit of that teaching. If I didn't see the fruit of that teaching, everybody will go back to square one. They didn't understand. Let's go back. Everybody go back. Pastor Jorge says that was the toughest thing. That was the toughest thing. And the way it would go would be like, you would realize, that area that pothole or that area of ignorance is covered in study such and such. Okay, let's go back and give them that study. Apostle says, they didn't understand Father's identity. So then to rediscuss that, because every teaching needs to show a fruit in you, because the word is the one that delivers. It's not us, it's the word. So like we were talking at some point about the different types of soil and the seeds, how they fall, where we had the seeds, but we would see those that would land by the road. They would fall into rocks, and then some of them would fall in good soil. So we were seeing how in good soil they would grow. So we would separate that. But then there were areas where the seed landed, but the birds ate it. So we would have to change the method. But then even those that landed in good soil, they would pay for those that didn't understand because everybody had to go back and do the studies again. Everybody together. So many good soils actually suffered because of the bad soils. I'm confessing it here now. I'm responsible for that. I'm sorry. How powerful. Of course. They were all like, oh, wow, we're going back. That's tough. Apostle says, but even the prophetic words, they're part of the tools that from before the manuals of teaching we had, the prophetic word has been there. Because that was always the real sort of the spirit, which is like the devotional, where we all nourish ourselves every day. And that was not negotiable. The prophetic word has been around since before Generation Joshua. That daily word has always been the standard of the ministry. And it's connecting with the word, letting the word guide us, give us a frame of reference, spiritual frame of reference, give us the ideas of how to handle ourselves in the day-to-day. We use the word. So today, notice that that's the nourishment. Now remotely, we feed the whole body everywhere. But there's a prophetic word. So now you see that the teas come with more of a prophetic confrontation. Let's say that the prophetic word is like the pastoral counseling. The teas are a prophetic confrontation, which like it aggressively confronts you, it hits you. Then the rest of the contents are prophetic flows, like the prophetic dials are the timelines of the house on Sundays. That's the prophetic dial of the house. That's a prophetic line where the whole body is being worked on completely. Now this whole structure, in the case of experience in the mission, like this podcast, is getting to know the body, getting to know their story, how they think, how they handle themselves. That's what experience in the mission is. And the other podcasts are apostolic confrontations. But everything, believe it or not, all that structure is the way in which the body is strengthened, like the tools, the weapons. So instead of feeding people's intellect, we feed their spirit. So we took away all the add-ons that were going to position the ministry as intellectual, to connect them to be true children who were going to be known by their fruit, not by their show. Because at the end, religion operates in show and impressionism to see who knows most. And this is not about who knows, because at the end, the word says that those who seek in private are rewarded in public. God is the one that promotes. God is the one that shows. He doesn't care what you know or don't know. God wants a contrite heart. And that contrite heart comes when you come humbly to His word, not seeking to learn. He doesn't want you to come to learn anything. He wants you to humble yourself and receive this with humility. That is a good soil. But Pastor Jorge was a point of arrow for that structure of the school of teachers, the school of ministry could be fulfilled. And he's the one that we delegated initially. Let's do this, let's execute. That's how that mission took place, which was a great mission, because let's say that is the second oldest mission of the ministry, the apostolic mission, and then the structural aspect of the school of ministry, because before that, Pastor Jorge was also the one that started. I was the first evangelist. Nice to meet you. I was the first evangelist, yes. And the second one was Pastor Jorge. And Pastor Jorge spent a lot of years being the only evangelist. And then we started teaching others for more to teach, and then we formed groups. That was the process. Today there are over 100 evangelists, probably 150, but everything started with him. That's the origin. And Apostle says that was the apostolic lab, we would work together and say, hey, tell me, let me see the teachings, let's move this, let's add this here. Because even the way the teaching is received is important, because it is within a systematic timeline, and that is structural, even though the teaching of the house is a constant all the time. It doesn't stop. You never stop learning here, never. It is so that the teachings that we have given in the different contents and the podcast, many say, but we should have that as a series. We don't have time for to make series, because the word is new, and that's never going to be over. What you have to do is connect every day to the nourishment of the house. No matter which way you get it, take the nourishment, because that's a good thing. There's fresh food. There's bread in the house of the bread maker. People cannot be hungry here. Those that are hungry is because really you don't have the soil that corresponds for the seed to be able to flourish. How does that sound? Pastor Jorge says, we went from repeating the same teachings to now seeing today the flow of new words. I say that there's nothing more impactful, because even though we see it as simple, but how we would go back. Everybody go back to the beginning. Okay, let's give the studies again. And we would be like, wait, wow, okay, let's do it. Of course, Apostle says, because that's what we've said in other times, that within the apostolic position, you send others to do something, but you yourself don't understand. And that's why it's good to obey. And that which Pastor Jorge is saying is deep, because you do it, but then you listen to it and see it so simply, but you're like, wow, that's deep. Everybody go back. What? Everybody again? And everybody had two choices. Either I go back or I leave. But many left. But others went back to the beginning. Whenever you didn't see the prophetic character, the service and vocation of kingdom, and the surrender that today really is what stands out in this ministry, if you didn't see that, everybody will go back. Because it had to be brought out. That surrender had to be brought out. And that's why we had that aggressive attitude that today we don't regret it. We say, Father, thank you, because the structure came out. And that structure is there. And I tell you, I would preach all the time. And I would say, one day I'm going to stop talking. And everybody was like, ha ha, that's a funny joke. One day I'm going to stop preaching, and one day I'm going to stop writing the prophetic words, because I was the one that did that. And one day I'm going to stop doing this, and one day I'm going to stop evangelizing. I stopped doing all that. I don't teach, I don't evangelize, I don't write the prophetic word. But initially I was a point of error. I stopped all that, but first I was a point of error for all that. And then Pastor Jorge was the second one in everything, doing everything, day and night, all the time, non-stop. And today, there's a structure. Pastor Jorge says, another thing, Apostle, which is interesting also, is that in those times, you also had to travel. That's right, Apostle says. And I was the one that had to cover you in the preachings on Sundays when we started. Or sometimes if you were giving the teachings, but you couldn't make it for one reason or another, then I was like, okay, I got to do it on Sunday. And it was very interesting. Yeah, Apostle says, Pastor Jorge was always the one that was there. Yeah, you're going to do this in evangelism. You're going to do that. So then it was the two of us. Then you're going to do the school of teachers. And then, look, you're going to start preaching. And it was a puzzle. It was a structural puzzle that, of course, it will never stop. I'm going to say something here that I say usually. We haven't even started. We haven't even started. Why? Yeah, because this is something that is globalized. It's global. It has a lot of demand. Now it's a reality that there are so many preachers, there's so many teachers, there's so many evangelists. So that now, in terms of what its structure and organizational structure, it has a connection, that a connotation that is in a different dimension. It's structural, but also in a plan of order, in order to be able to cover more territory in more organized way. So that's why I said we haven't started yet, because that also has another dimension of how to broaden the organizational chart, how to cover different areas, for there to be structure in every area. It's a process. It's a process. And that's why the demand gives you the strategy. That is a constant. And that's why I say we haven't even started, because at the end, you did that thinking of the territory and the place and the people that you were with, but you never imagined that today you were going to be in the whole nation, or that you were going to be in so many different countries. So everything changes. Now it has a different demand. Now these big missions turn into small missions. And that's why I said, Apostle says that the demand gives you the strategy. And I would tell them back then, you're not going to be here. You're going to stop working at your jobs. There was we're always prophesizing. And everybody has seen everything that was prophesied. Everybody. That's why the alignment and the authority of the leadership and the pastoral team here, it's because everything was said. It's not something that was by chance. We didn't come here to make things up. I'm sitting here, and not because I made it up. No. Things like this were planned from the first time of the ministry. The ministry should have started like this, but when we realized that people weren't understanding, the Holy Spirit sent us to start from zero, to make people right the basics. Everybody go back to zero. No matter if there were a lot of theological minds, there were a lot of professionals, doesn't matter. Everybody from zero, go back. Write it down. You know why? Not to fill anyone's intellect. You know why we did it? To bring out the children. To bring out the children. Where were the children? That's too much, Apostle. Apostle says, I get violent when I speak of these topics. You brought it up. And you knew how this was going to get. So why do you bring things up like this? Stop right there, says Pastor Jorge. Stop right there. Pastor Jorge says, you have brought out more than just the children. And Apostle says, speaking of that, it's interesting that you bring that up. In that time when we were teaching in that way, with all that surrender, I remember that while we were teaching, I said prophetically, Jireh is going to give studies to you. Today, Jireh is 16. That's Pastor Jorge's daughter. She's 16. She's 17. So 15 years later, prophetically, and she is teaching studies today. There are people that are shaking because they're like, oh my gosh, Jireh is giving the studies, just like you said. There are people that are scared because they say, the prophecy is fulfilling, and look at me. There are people that are scared because they say, wow, Jireh is going to be the one giving me studies. Jireh is the one that intimidates everybody now. And now everybody looks at Jireh and says, if I don't align myself, then they're going to take me out. It's very powerful to know that, like the word says, that the heavens and the earth will pass, but his word will never pass. People, you simply have to believe and depend on the word. Nothing in your life can be above the word, because the only thing that the enemy respects is the word. the only thing that changes the course of life and destiny, the only thing that changes everything, you understand, is the word. The word, when you handle it within the context that Jesus himself established, that said, they call me Lord, Lord, but they don't do what I say. In other words, it's not for you to know the word, it's for you to do and assume the word. So the word is not an expression, the word is an obedience. Wow. The word, you cannot even say it with your mouth. Your obedience activates, and when it's activated, then all the promises will be manifested in your favor. That is the dynamic of the word. That's why we didn't want any more knowledge. We were like, there's a spirit here that is looking for more. That is not to be a child of God, but is to pretend and act like they know. And we cut it. Because the word is not to be memorized, is to assume it, is for it to become life in you. Your life has to reflect the word. People have to see the word in you and say, wow. That is why this is not for you to say it. Others have to speak of you, not you of yourself. The fruit is what speaks. You don't have to speak. So it is very important, like Jesus said, okay, what do they say about me? Oh, some say that you're a liar, some say this and that. Okay. And what do you think? See how interesting. So it is important that you yourself evaluate. What do others think of me? It's important. And all that, you put it on the table and you study it for yourself to confront yourself and be able to change different aspects of your life. That's why, at the end of it all, I repeat what I said at the beginning. That the earth and the heavens will pass, making the point that everything will fade and nothing has power to surpass what he decreed. And if he decreed that the earth and the heavens will pass, but his word will never be broken down, then you align yourself and get the foundation depending on the Holy Spirit.
Gracias por sintonizar nuestro podcast Misión GJ. Nos vemos en un próximo episodio.